All right, so let's go ahead and get started, everybody. On this lovely Thursday evening or afternoon, or if you're overseas, morning, wherever you might be. This is an inclusive space. My name is Mohan Sivaloganathan. I am so honored to be here with some phenomenal leaders to be able to facilitate an incredible conversation, one that's going to be illuminating on DEI, and with the provocative question, is DEI dead? So for folks who are attending tonight, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Who are you? What are your pronouns? Where are you joining us from? Just to get your mind going, and then maybe something a little bit lighter than the topic of is DEI dead? I'll give you two options here to be able to respond to. One, a light one. What do you think of the new Beyonce album? All right, that's an easy one. If you haven't listened to it, that's okay. All right, this is an inclusive space. No shame, no shade if you haven't listened to the new Beyonce album. I'll give you another one. What do you think about this whole J. Cole, Kendrick, this stuff that's happening with them? All right, so two easy ones to be able to jump into the chat and to be able to introduce yourself. I'll also invite the panelists to respond to that question if you would like. Just to set a little bit more context for who we are, why we are here. A very quick story I will share from this past weekend. Spent some time with family, with cousins, and with their kids. And I was with my niece, who's 14 years old. And I remember like literally like weeks after she was born, kind of holding her and just imagining the possibilities, for the future. And what was incredible, I was spending some time with my niece. And we got to talking about, she's 14, soon to be 15. We got talking about the work that I've been doing for the past 5 years, formerly as the CEO of an organization called Our Turn, an organization that uplifts the voices and change-making ability of young people across the country to be change makers, to be advocates within the education system. And what was remarkable to me, and I never would have imagined this 14 years ago, was here she was asking questions about, can I start my own local petition drives? Can I advocate to my school board? Can I build a coalition of young leaders around me? Is this program available for me? Is this one available for me? She was reading stuff off of my own website at Our Turn that like I don't think half of our staff have even seen before. Like she was so ready. And in addition to just being a very proud uncle in that moment, what was amazing to me is that young leaders, emerging leaders, they are hungry and ready for change right now. So not tomorrow, not next year, not being the leaders of the future, but the leaders of right now. And that gives me so much hope and inspiration for what is possible during this moment in our history. And an organization like MVP, that is what they do day in and day out. They show up, they are allies for leaders, placing them in high impact professions, internships, programs, so that they can drive change right now. So that it's not just about talk, but it's about walking the talk. It's about making things happen. And I believe that's why we're here, not to just hear and maybe pick up a couple of talking points and be able to move on, but to actually be able to do something. And so what I would encourage folks to think about who are participating in the webinar tonight is to consider supporting an organization like MVP through a contribution, through a donation that enables this work to be able to sustain, so that all the incredible leaders across the country have that fuel, the resources, the networks that they need to go out and do the type of world-changing work and advocacy and initiatives that we know is just so vitally necessary and important. So with that, we're going to dive in, y'all. And hopefully you won't be hearing too much from me. You're going to be hearing from these incredible panelists. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask our panelists to be able to introduce themselves. I'll tee you up. If you could share who you are, your pronouns, the work that you do, and a quick take, because we have, of course, a lot to cover tonight. A quick take on a pointed question: is DEI dead? And again, if you want to respond to the Beyonce or the J. Cole, Drake, Kendrick thing, you're welcome to do that too. Let's start with Kiki.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kanetra Kiki Hights. My pronouns are she, her. Please, you'll hear Mohan refer to me as Kiki. That is a preference for me. So please feel free to call me Kiki. I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for a company called Guenther Son, and we are a food manufacturing company, one of the biggest in the world. In bakery products, bread, cookies, anything gluten, we do. So we're in your local grocery stores, in your restaurants, and so forth, as well as in your fast food places as well. So I lead the DEI initiatives for the US, Canada, and our European locations in the UK, Belgium, and Germany as well. So pretty big task, keeping up with the global diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives as well. That is, I call that my day job. And then I am also on the board for the San Antonio LGBT Chamber of Commerce as well. So this job is my day and my night job as the work continues in this space. I do have to point out, as you talk about Beyonce, I have my Beyonce stickers right here, my flawless Beyonce sticker, as well as my Renaissance sticker hat right here. So I am a Beyonce fan, and that album is on repeat right now for me. I feel like that album, she wrote that album for Black women, and to talk about their struggles. And even though it's a country album, it's her version of country. So I love that album. So I just wanted to point that out. I know we have some fellow Beyonce lovers on the call today, but I had to throw out that shout out to Beyonce. But also, on the question, is DEI dead? For DEI to be dead, Webster's dictionary would have to remove those words from their dictionary. And they're not removing those words. DEI has been around, the word diversity has been around and used forever, and it's still going to be used. We just have to look at how do we redecorate the house to make it stand out even more. So in my definition, DEI will never be dead until Webster's dictionary or whoever the powers may be say, we're not going to put this in our vocabulary anymore. We're still going to have it.
Thank you. Much appreciated, Kiki. Dion, we'd love to pass it to you.
All right. Thank you, Kiki, and thank you, Mohan. My name is Dion. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Belonging at a fintech company called Chime. You may have seen Chime commercials around, or you may, if you're a basketball fan, we are a sponsor for the Dallas Mavericks. But we're around and we're really focused on how do we help everyday people reach financial progress and make financial progress throughout their lives. So really thinking about how do we create more inclusive products for everyday people, and making sure that we're able to provide cutting edge and innovative opportunities for people to thrive in their financial lives. In terms of, well, first, Beyonce, Cowboy Carter, they're definitely an album that I'm playing on repeat. The transition from Riverdance to Two Hands to Heaven to Tyrant to, Sweet Honey Buckin', that's it's just on repeat right now. So definitely loving that album. And then for Kendrick, Drake, J. Cole, sometimes you need to apologize. I don't really appreciate it, but it's just a part of life. So very curious about how that all is going to play out. Is DEI dead? I hope this iteration of DEI is dead in terms of the splashy announcements and the glitz and glam that comes with what people have been trying to do with the DEI so far in terms of make it feel more real than it actually was in a lot of companies. And my thing is, I want DEI to be as boring, as stable, as business critical as accounting. I want it to feel like we don't even have to think about DEI because it's so critical to the company. There's no way that we can operate without it. So that's what I'm hoping to push throughout my work here.
Make DEI boring. I think that's powerful. That's new. That's powerful. Also, I'd say, Dion, I heard somebody say the other day that J. Cole's apology is it's like a representation of restorative justice in the public sense, which I thought was like mind blowing. I definitely hadn't looked at it from that perspective. Cecil, I'd love to pass it to you.
Hello, thank you, Mohan, and thank you, Dion and Kiki. Hello, everyone. My name is Cecil Johnson. Pronouns are he and him, and I am responsible for diversity, equity, and inclusion for Johnson & Johnson's pharmaceutical division, which is called Innovative Medicine. That's for commercial as well as R&D. So let me answer first the popular pop questions, which so I did listen to Beyonce's album, put on Spotify, goes through. But I'm gonna tell you what I like. I like the DJ Scratch remix of Texas Hold'em and Dance to the Drummer's Beat by Herman Kelly. Check it out, Instagram, on YouTube. So anyway, so that's that, right? Secondly, just happened to be listening to Sway in the morning, and they were taking calls about, Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole apologizing, and that really Kendrick Lamar was really talking about Drake and all that. So all I have to say is, let's just move past this, right? And play the music, right? So that's just my view on it. So is DEI dead? And I'm actually glad that the question is posed this way, because it allows us to examine it a little differently. And that is, I think, sometimes reducing diversity, equity, inclusion to that term gives people the opportunity to label it and put it in a container. And then we can just lump it all together and then criticize it or attack it, etc. But I believe that diversity, equity, inclusion is not dead, because the questions I ask is global workforce diversity going away? The answer is no, it's inevitable. If anyone has seen the movie Hitch years ago, where Hitch is where Kevin James and Will Smith is teaching him how to dance. He starts doing the typewriter, and he's like, can't stop it, cannot stop it. Well, you can't stop global workforce diversity. It is inevitable. Secondly, equity. As the world changes and as more knowledge and as generations change, fairness is relative, and it changes what it means to be fair, but also maximizing the potential of employees is always going to be there. So that's not going away. And then finally, inclusion. Inclusion is the unlock for all of it, and being able to make everyone and anyone feel like they are part of something bigger than themselves while still being themselves. So for me, it is not dead. I just recommend that we continue to hold people accountable to talking about exactly what it is by separating it, as opposed to putting a label on it and keeping it in this container.
I gotta say, so for folks joining and watching this webinar, we did not prep for all the pop culture references that have been dropped, but I'm loving all of it. Cecil with the Hitch reference too, like that's gold right there. I'm not a rom-com fan, but that's one of my favorites, is Hitch. So well played, sir. Well played. I want to build off something you just mentioned, Cecil, like the way that you defined inclusivity. I think is really powerful, about being yourself and being a part of something much bigger. And I think something that's really brilliant in terms of how MVP put together this panel is all three of you have been in like the figurative like hot seat, like you've done it, right? You have applied experience and practice, and so you are full dynamic human beings all to yourselves, and you are part of something bigger too. And just so everybody knows in the audience, like that's what a lot of this conversation is going to be about, is like, what is it really like to do this? Not just to be at the conceptual level, or like Dion was saying, the things that are maybe just flashy. We're going to get past the flashy stuff. We're going to get into like what's real life. And so with that, I have a question that I first want to offer up to Kiki and then to Dion. And also let me just note one more caveat too. So I think just building on what folks have shared already. So when we say DEI, or when I might say DEI as a facilitator, we'll kind of consider it to be sort of like maybe a catch-all, but play around with that as you see fit, right? That doesn't have to be the brand. That doesn't have to be the term. Like we can dismantle that. We can rebrand it as we see fit. So that said, first to Kiki again, then to Dion. Would love to hear, how have you prioritized DEI in your work, in your organization, and what I'm especially interested in hearing about, and I imagine folks in the audience too, is as you've been doing that work, what's been surprising, and what's been challenging? So how have you prioritized it? What's been surprising? What's been challenging?
I think for me, and I always think about the beginning of my journey and how I got started into DEI. And what's important that I want to also call out is that a lot of what's going on right now is that we have people in DEI roles who are passionate about it, but don't have the knowledge to implement it into organizations, which causes it to look like you're checking boxes and that DEI is dead, and you don't implement it using the correct strategies. So I want to, say that first, that we have to be able to really look at, you should be studying right now strategic business strategies and learning those things. I mean, I took courses on process improvements and implementation strategies and things on return on investments. That DEI knowledge and passion that you have will always be there. But in order for you to implement it into the business and to make it a priority, you have to really learn what those strategies are and how you can work your DEI into those strategies where I cannot have it because my strategies won't work without it. And that's really what I really worked on doing is I took time. I didn't come in to the organization. I've been here for almost 3 years now. I didn't come in and just say, okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with training, which is usually what every DEI practitioner group goes to, or even if you don't have a DEI practitioner and you have a counsel or consultant, the first thing that they say, okay, let's do training on unconscious bias, which I'm like, I don't even believe in unconscious bias. It's very conscious now, right? We're past unconscious bias. It should be conscious. But that's the first thing that people do, which is not, in my eyes, the right move to make. You have to take the time to learn the business, talk to people, build relationships, learn what they're doing, learn the organization, then sit down and take your cultural knowledge and build the strategy based upon that. So I took months to just build a strategy of what we're going to focus on, what are going to be our main buckets, as well as get visible leadership commitment. I think that is the very first thing that you want to do is get visible leadership commitment, because without that leadership commitment, you have nothing. And so getting that commitment and getting the strategy together in a place where it's implemented into the business needs, where you're implementing it into different areas and threads throughout the business, that's the most key part and priority. And that's really how I've made it in the forefront is like, we're operating in a 5-year strategy. So every year we keep the same strategy, our goals change. And that's how we've made it and kept it a consistent pattern in our organization, is ensuring that what we do falls in line with what our strategy is. And we're not doing it just because it's a nice to do. We're doing it because it's a part of what we need to do for the business. I'll kick it over to Dion because I know he's got words for it. So
I mean, I feel like you covered a lot, Kiki. There's not much for me to add on. I'll just emphasize the point that you made around understanding and knowing the business and understanding what is going to be effective in your specific organization. Like you mentioned, Kiki, there's like a playbook around DEI where it's like, okay, we do the trainings and we do the employee resource groups, then we send people to conferences, and then that's kind of it. And we see what happens. But instead, it's really thinking about what are the specific needs that the organization has and what makes that specific culture unique, and how do you build strategies and interventions to be able to address the needs of that organization. So for an example, for me, I came in as the second DEI hire. So we had our head of DEI already there who built the strategy. When I came in, my first priority was training. But the second priority that I had was figuring out what will be the unique way to connect the employee experience to the customer experience, because people truly care and leaders truly care about what's going to drive the bottom line, which is the paying customers. We are a B2C company, so we focus directly with consumers on our products. And when you think about people who are living paycheck to paycheck, that would be our member base. It's about 70% of our member base. And when you think about the translation and demographics of who lives paycheck to paycheck within the US, a lot of those translate to the same types of communities that we're talking about when we're talking about underrepresentation from the employee side, right? So recognizing that the demographics of our customer base align to the same stuff that we're trying to push from a education standpoint around how to support, underrepresented communities, that's an easy connection for me. So now I'm partnering with our customer experience team to understand and let people know, like, how do we help our employees understand the context around the communities that we're serving? How do we help them understand the challenges that our members are facing in terms of financial decision making that they have and some of the barriers to financial progress? So I share that to share DEI doesn't have to necessarily sit in this box where it's only focused on human resources and it's only focused on talent. There are so many other ways that diversity, equity, inclusion teams can influence the business and influence the profit and loss sheet and make sure that you're having that business impact.
I just really appreciate the perspectives, folks. And also thanks to everybody who's jumping into the chat. Share your ideas, your reflections, your questions. You can offer questions in the chat. You can also put into the Q&A function. And, we'll try and make sure we have about 10, 15 minutes towards the end for questions from the audience. I feel like what builds from that question is this notion of building the case for the work, the philosophy, the values. Oftentimes the case is restricted essentially to specific metrics. And I'd want to challenge all of us to maybe think a little bit more expansively than metrics. But I think the question I'd want to start with, going back to Dion and then over to Cecil, is essentially, how do you know it's working? Like, how do you know your DEI or DEIB or whatever the acronym is that you want to run with? How do you know it's working? How are you measuring that? How are you communicating it? What are the stories that you're telling? Again, I think we could be more expansive than just like numbers on a document. Not to say those numbers don't matter, but again, to Dion and then to Cecil.
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because that's been one of the priorities that I've had for this year is how do we quantify and tell the story? Because something that I experienced in leading training, I was leading a training and one of our staff members said, "How are we doing on DEI?" Right? And in the middle of the training, I'm trying to come up with, okay, well, I could talk about representation numbers. I could talk about compensation and pay equity. I could talk about our engagement survey. I could talk about all these different things. And I'm trying to come up with like a streamlined way to explain it to someone who's not necessarily engaged with the work on a day-to-day basis. And at that point, it was like, oh, we have a problem. We aren't able, or in that case, I wasn't able to clearly articulate cleanly, this is how we're doing. So we need to be able to be super clear about what are we measuring, what's important to people, and how do we tell that story in a way that we talk about our profit in our revenue numbers or any other metrics that we talk about, like net promoter score for the business. How do we make sure that we're streamlining that and communicating that story in the same way? So I know you, Mohan, you mentioned not to focus on specific metrics, but right now, in terms of the specific story that we're working through, we have 4 sets of metrics that we're looking at. One is workforce demographics. I think everyone knows if you're talking about diversity, you need to understand who's there and where are people positioned within the organization. When we're talking about equity, we're looking at all of the different experiences that people have throughout the life cycle within the employee experience and measuring, is there parity, is there fairness there? When we're looking at belonging, we're looking at our engagement scores and making sure that people have similar engagement levels based on the different employee groups that they're a part of. We're making sure that there's not huge parity with that. And then in terms of connecting it back to the business, a metric that I'm building with some other teams is around trustworthiness. We have a bunch of metrics around net promoter score for our customers. And that's a great metric to look at in terms of whether our customers trust us because they would, advertise us and market us to other people. But does the general public trust us? And we have different metrics that look at our corporate reputation. And then do candidates trust us? So we are now looking at what our offer acceptance rate is as a measure of trust. So we know that employees trust us because they're still here. So we look at retention. We look at candidates. Do they trust us by whether they come into the organization? We look at trust from a customer base by looking at net promoter score for the business. And then we look at trust from a general public standpoint from our corporate reputation. So being able to tie all of that together to tell this story, recognizing that if we as a financial company want to become this great company in the world, all of our different stakeholders have to trust us and trust that we're doing great things in the world. And that's the story that we're trying to build out. And that's what we're using to both measure the internal culture and dynamics, but also talk about the ways that that impacts the business.
All right.
Cecil, please.
Sure. No, thanks. So what I want to start with, actually kind of where Dion left off, and then I'll move from there, which is, at Johnson & Johnson, we've been focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion for decades, right? It's not anything new to us, but we still come with it always with a fresh view and a certain level of excitement and energy, but because we connect it to our business strategy. And that's really critical. And where I want to pick up from is that we measure the impact that anything that we do on our employees all the time. We do it annually. And as far as engagement surveys, ongoing surveys, sentiment surveys, but also within our engagement surveys, we look at inclusion specifically to see the degree to which our employees feel like they belong. And when we look at that measure, most managers, most leaders with a certain amount of employees will get a measurement on that where they can put action plans again. And it's a way for them to get ongoing feedback about how they are doing with including their employees. And being able to look at, do employees feel like their contributions matter? Do they feel like they have access to information? Do they feel like they are included in decision-making? Do they feel like their contributions matter? And we do that on an ongoing basis, and then we react to it. Or we proactively focus on that. So I just wanted to share that part about really, one of our platforms is people first, right? And that bridges to something that we have called our race to health equity. And that is our approach to how do we combat or ensure that the color of your skin doesn't determine the quality of care that you get or the access that you get to care. And we partner with, by creating enduring alliances, we partner with healthcare organizations by partnering with communities, we actually look to enable communities also. And we think about how, and we measure that, how many people are we reaching? And then what are those people that we're reaching? What are they doing differently? As well as measuring how can we create more access to our medicines globally? And we can measure that. And by doing that, we can make that impact. So we have a lot of different ways to measure. The other way, so I'm not monopolizing the time, is, and I think this is important, they're all important. This is also important, which is diversity in clinical trials. And that's critically important, that when we are looking to study a potential life-changing, healthcare changing medicine, let's make sure that we include everyone in that, so that we have the evidence that can span all communities. And we have been very successful in doing that. We had a study called a visible study focused on psoriasis and looking at people of color and skin, because if you look at many of the skin diseases, often what's understudied or underlooked at is how it represents or manifests itself in people of color, different skin types. So we recognize that that's important in order to really serve the broader community, but also make an impact, and we can measure that.
I mean, just incredible. I appreciate what y'all have shared, and just the level of depth and intentionality, which goes just far beyond that superficial layer that I think folks know. This space of DEI has been stuck within for a long time, right? Like the flashy part, right? That we've talked about, and And I feel like that opens us up for a question that actually is sort of echoed in the Q&A. And again, I want to remind folks to continue to engage in the chat. You can post questions in the chat and also in the Q&A, and we'll open things up for the audience shortly. You know, just that elephant in the room, right? DEI was the thing. It was the jam like a few years ago, for terrible circumstances, right? Generationally negative, unjust circumstances. But everybody wanted to hop onto that wagon. And just as quickly, it seems to be going away, right? Hence the question, right? The prompt is DEI dead? And, you know, you have corporations that are nervous, law firms that are nervous, educational institutions, higher ed that's nervous, politicians, you can keep going. So knowing that there's economic and cultural pressure that's being applied toward this work, towards these values, the question I have, I want to start with Cecil and then over to Kiki is how do you preserve the value of what you're working on right now? And knowing how effective it is, as all three of you have very eloquently put it already this evening, knowing that value and knowing that there's pressure coming from the opposite direction, how do you preserve? Like, how do you sustain? How do you grow?
Great question. So what I hear you talking about is headwinds, right? And there's always been headwinds in anything that you do, but there seems to be all of a sudden with all these tailwinds that we had coming out of 2020 and George Floyd, and also the disparity of with regards to COVID treatment, right? Now all of a sudden there seems to be more headwinds. So I'm gonna be a little bit funny here for the important subject, which is I think there's opportunity to introduce 3 windbreakers, right? How's that? So we'll call windbreakers. Remember when you were little, you had the little windbreaker on, and you know your mom always had you wear the windbreaker. I don't know if it worked or not, but these should work, right? When it comes to really trying to withstand those headwinds. One is values. Whatever you're doing in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging in your organization should be connected to the organization's values. I think I saw it in the chat. Companies that unfortunately took a try to do diversity, equity, inclusion, but did not have it connected to their values, fell off. So have it connected to your values, and our organization is connected to our values. It's in our credo that is in stone in our corporate headquarters, right? So connected to your values, so that way you always have that beacon, that North Star that you're accountable to for your internal and for your employees, but also externally. The second thing is business strategy, what came up today from Kiki and from Dion, which is around it should be connected to your business strategy. So when you have it connected to your business strategy, then you can withstand those headwinds because you can talk about how this is a part of how we do business. And it's not only for the short term, but it's for the long-term impact and a way for us to be competitive. That's important too. And then the third way is accountability, holding people accountable to your values of your company, but also holding them accountable to the business strategy. Most organizations are very good at holding employees accountable to their business strategy. And if diversity, equity, and inclusion is a part of your business strategy, then you can hold them accountable to it for the behaviors that you're looking for, but also for the impact and outcomes that you expect of them, and that you measure that accordingly. And then you reward them for that, or you talk about the consequences of that. But accountability is key. So those are my 3 windbreakers for these headwinds, which is values, connected to the values, making sure that you are connected to a business strategy, but also that you hold everyone accountable to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And I'm going to jump on that, Cecil, because I mean, those are exactly the same things that I would say as well, especially around the accountability factor. You've got to have some kind of form of accountability, even if you build it into your performance measurement and your development process there. I mean, hold people accountable when it comes to their raises as well. If you put specific goals in their end of year performance review around DEI and it affects their percentage of their performance, then they're going to be more accountable towards that as well. So make them accountable where it affects their pay and how they're rated as well, in order to get them to really carry on with your strategy. I think a lot of the resistance is, I always say it's fear-based. It was fear-based when George Floyd happened, and it's fear-based now. Because it was fearful, oh, if we don't have DEI in the organization, we're not going to survive, people are going to leave. It was fear. Now it's fear of, oh, well, we've gotten all kinds of diversity in, and now they're going to take over our positions of power. So now I'm afraid. And so it's a reaction based upon fear-based, and so using some of those tactics to help eliminate the fear of that going on helps. I use a lot of data from the US Census Bureau. Interracial marriage is at an all-time high, which means there's going to be more blended children coming because of that. By the year 2050, we're not supposed to be a majority world. We're not going to be able to tell whose race is what. It's not going to be, oh, your organization is 80% white, 10% black, 10% Hispanic. That's not going to happen anymore. By 2050, it's going to be completely flipped. And then people are going to be asking, well, what about me? Now I'm in the minority, and I was in the majority. Now I'm in the minority. What about me? That's what DEI is about. If we had kept that, telling people we kept that, then you would have been prepared for these changes that are happening. So you also have to be prepared for the future as well. I love the new generation coming up because they're not taking anything. They are fearless. When we have people who are fearful, they are very fearless, and they're willing to do whatever it needs in order for their needs to be met. And so we need to think about that, about preparedness for the future. What is the future going to look like? And is your organization prepared to handle that in the future? Is your organization prepared for Generation Z and Alpha generations to come and take over the company? And they're not going to keep it the same way that you've been running it. And those are the things that we need to really take in consideration. If your organization doesn't have a next generational ERG, you're missing out on that and that other perspectives as well. So I would just add to that, be prepared for the future, because DEI is going to flip the script on a lot of people. And where you don't have it, they're going to be hungry for it because they missed out on that opportunity to learn and grow that's happening right now.
Snaps all around for everybody. I want to ask one more question to the panel, and then we're going to shift into some of the questions from the audience. I'm interested in what advice you would offer to folks who might be wanting to get started, to be able to move on the type of journey that you've been through, that you're recommending, and considering like a few different dynamics. One is that, again, you've got all of the environmental pressure that we're talking about, and also the harsh reality that oftentimes, now this is a more cynical case, so maybe in cynical cases, you maybe have an organization that's been struggling with DEI, and so they're like, all right, we're going to get a person of color to come solve this for us. And there's scarcity that folks are coming into, feeling isolated, kind of trying to fight uphill. So you've got all these factors that could be against people. That's not universally the experience for everybody, but again, in some situations, right? So basically just getting to the question again, and this is for everybody. I'd love to maybe go Cecil, Dion, Kiki. What advice do you have to that person, not to the company, to that one person? It could be somebody who's in the audience right now who's like, I want to get started. Like, what advice would you give them?
Yes, I would give the advice that my leader and the chief diversity officer of Johnson & Johnson, Wanda Hope, said to me, and I kind of got it at first, but then I really got it later, which was, she said, you have to meet the organization you're working with where they are. And I recognize that, doing this work, you get so passionate, you're so excited. No place is moving as fast as you want them to move. And my advice would be to that individual, say, understand where your organization is, and then how are you going to incrementally move them along. Most organizations will not move in anything from A to Z. So how do you get from A to B? Maybe A.1, A.1 but how do you move them incrementally? You may feel that the organization is not feeling going fast enough, faster than you, but your internal clock is moving faster. So I would say, in order for you to feel success and to create success, meet the organization where they are, start there, find out where they are, and then move them with enough go with the tide that's there, but also be able to exert just enough pressure that if there's some uncomfortableness, it's about them building a muscle as opposed to being resistant. And I think that's where you can start and also be able to preserve your own energy as someone doing this work.
Yeah, I would say start with self-reflection and understand what's driving you to take on action. And the reason why I say that is because I did a lot of damage when I first started. To Kiki's point about being passionate, but not being an expert in the space. And the reason why I say that is because I came into DEI feeling like I had to fight. Like I was a fighter. I was here to change the world. I was here to burn things down. People need to move faster. Why are they not moving fast enough? And to Cecil's point around meeting people where they are, I felt like they need to move faster. So I'm going to fight with them. And there was this sense of self-righteousness that I had around DEI and doing this work where I felt like I'm here to change the world. And if you're not with me, like you're against me. And that is such an isolating and lonely space to be that leads to burnout. It leads to burnout. So if you are not clear about why you're doing this work, the time that it takes to do this work, and the patience that it requires to do this work, then I would say it might not be the space for you to be in. But if you are patient and you understand clearly what you're driving towards and you are okay with it not moving as fast as you might personally expect, then I would say start with understanding the language of the business and how different processes work. And then from there, start asking questions. That's actually how I got into this work is I said, hey, we have this value about equity. Like, what are we doing about this? What does that actually mean? How are we measuring that? And because I kept asking questions, people are like, oh, well, let's talk about it. Let's do a training about it. Let's start setting goals around it. And lo and behold, 10 years later, I'm still doing DEI work formally. But I would say really understand why you're doing the work, understand the patience and time required, and understand how the organization and systems work that you're trying to change.
I like what you said, Dion, about asking questions, because that's sometimes what I get is people say, Kiki, you ask too many questions. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to get you to the answer on your own without me having to tell you. But it's important to ask those questions, right? So we have to really do that self-discovery. And I mean, I completely agree. DEI is a journey. It is a very long road trip. It's not a light switch. You can't just turn it on and then expect for everybody to fall in line with what you're doing. You have to be in the heart of, I'm going to take the time to change people's perspectives. I got to change people's minds. I got to change people's thought patterns. And then I have to go in on the other hand, but opposite of the people factor, I got to change policies. I have to change procedures and guidelines and then work my way into that realm as well. And so all of that, it takes months to do. It's not just like, okay, one day I'm going to come in, I'm going to change a policy, and that's going to be it. You may have to change a policy 15 times before that's it. And you're working on that one policy. It takes a lot of time in order to do those things. And so that expectation and that mindset in your head, knowing that you're coming in with the passion, but you also need to come in with the time and then the patience as well. And then, I had a mentor, and that's another big part, is having a mentor that has been in the space that can help you along in this journey. I had a mentor tell me, you have to be very comfortable being in uncomfortable situations. If you're not comfortable in in the uncomfortableness of DEI, you're in the wrong field, because it is a very uncomfortable space to be in. You have to have uncomfortable conversations. where people challenge different things about race and gender and sexual orientation and all the whole gamut. You have to have those conversations. You have to be able to get up in front of C-suite leadership and sell yourself and sell your programs, and it makes for some uncomfortableness. So you have to be very comfortable in the uncomfortableness of what DEI is and be a complete advocate. Like Dion said, I started out like as a fighter too, and I was holding up my picket sign, and my mentor said, "Nope, take a step back, because if you're going to be out in the fighting, you're going to get tired, and it's not going to last too long, and people are going to be resistant because you're fighting. You're not changing." So note the difference between being a fighter and being an advocate and making change. That's what I would give the advice for. So.
Oh, incredible stuff. Thank you, y'all. We've got time for maybe one or two questions from the audience before we close. But just, I mean, there are gems galore thus far. I'm learning a lot. And think about the notion of comfort and discomfort. I worked with a team member once who talked about the joy and the beauty that can come from living on your growing edge. And that's how we become more expansive, right? That's how we become more abundant. That doesn't happen in just any more reclusive, protected space. Is when you open yourself up. Something that's like running through my mind and just hearing what you all had to share is, I think about my experience in leading a national organization, and you could get a quote unquote best in class strategic plan framework, logic model, business strategy, marketing plan, whatever it is. Ultimately, so often, what's going to move any of those tools or frameworks or ideologies is the psychological safety of the folks that you're working with, right? Do they feel that confidence, that agency, to be able to move forward? So that's a reflection for myself, but I note that as a segue to a question from someone in the audience, and I'll offer this up to the full group. 1, 2, 3 of you, feel free to jump in if you're so inclined. How can you empower employees to answer questions honestly about whether they feel included and like they belong? What are some ways to build trust throughout your organization?
I'm like, who's going to jump in first? Because that's a hard question as well, about building trust and trusting people and not feeling like you're going to be retaliated against. I think that's the biggest thing that employees feel is like, I can't say anything, I can't ask those questions because I feel like I'm going to be retaliated against. And so how can I create a safe space and environment for my employees to be able to come and ask those difficult questions as well? And so I think you have to provide them, and that's why we do a top-down approach where we focus on the leadership skills of DEI and ensuring that our leaders, because the employees are not going to do anything that the leaders don't do. And so if they don't provide that safe space and the ability to be trustworthy, and that I can come to you and I understand what you're going through and the questions, then they're not going to do it. So we provide the leaders those opportunities first with training and coaching and having these conversations with them so that they can be the vessel for DEI and for employees to go and ask them questions, and therefore that builds trust. And that's a long run game there that happens because as leadership comes in, you got to redo it all over again. And it's a long standard of principles, but it also needs to be a part of what we do as an organization. Like I know Cecil said, embedded in the values as well. If you have an organization that's competency-based training, that needs to be a competency in there as well. And there needs to be continuous learning on it also. So it always has to start with the leadership. Your employees are not going to do anything that the leaders don't do.
Yeah, let me add to what Kiki said, because I agree with what she said around leadership, and that's really important. And it's a tough question, right? Because I think every organization is different. Where I also would add to what Kiki said around leadership is that I think it's important for leadership, in order for leadership to show that it's a safe space, is that for leadership to demonstrate a level of vulnerability themselves and to talk about what, regardless of what background they are, to talk about what they know and what they don't know. So that it creates, I hate to say this, let me see if I can say it the right way, the validity to someone's different experience. So it does not look like this so outside the norm, but a leader that says, I've been in some situation where I didn't understand this, and this is what I learned. So I think it's important for leaders to be vulnerable. And that creates the space for others to say, oh, that's okay. And to accept that's a leadership behavior in my organization. And it's actually shown for me to be stronger by being able to share that. At the same time, I also say that employees, it's important that as a leader of an employee, that if you are one, is that you help the employee understand also discretion, right? You can't tell everybody in every forum everything about you, right? Everything that you're feeling. You have to have some level of discernment, and you can start with some level of trust, but understand that there's degrees of trust and allow people to earn the rest of the ways. So I would look at it. That's what I would say from both sides of it.
Dion, no pressure, but anything you might want to add?
No, I'll pass because I want to make sure we can get to other questions before we wrap.
Yeah, we're just about at time, so let's see if we can do maybe a lightning round question here. I'm gonna try and fuse two of the questions together. Let's see how this works, how well this plays. One person asked about causing positive damage that the organization doesn't deem negative. Someone else asked about what drives you each day. So for one, I'm gonna use a little bit of moderator privilege. I'm gonna reframe positive damage to good trouble, the late great John Lewis. What drives the three of you each day to bring more good trouble into the world?
Guess we're going ping pong. Can you go?
No, go ahead, Cecil.
All right. I would say, I realize not really what drives me is, so my dad's a pharmacist, 90 plus years old, but I worked in this pharmacy at a young age, stocking shelves, doing all that, working the cash register, making keys, doing all that stuff. And what I saw was patients come in, his clients come in, and really experiencing seeing them talk about how they didn't get all the information for what they need to do for the medication. And I remember asking him, like, why didn't they just ask that from the doctor? And his response was, I was young. He said, you're going to find that some people get treated differently because of how they look and how they represent themselves. And I realized that now I didn't necessarily want to be a pharmacist, but how could I be the person that really interrupts or disrupts that norm of people who look different or think differently or behave differently, that they get treated differently. And every stage in my career, there was something that I did that lent itself to this, and then lends itself now to doing this work around diversity, equity, and inclusion full time. So that's where my journey started, to start to pull me into this, but also for me to push as to why it's important to really continue to move this work forward for the good of individuals, but also for the good of organizations to make an impact in the world that they aspire to.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was one of my idols growing up. I have a strong sense of focus around fairness and justice. And because of that, that is the lens that I bring into the work that I do every day, making sure that we can create spaces where people, regardless of what they look like or how they identify, are able to thrive in the workplace, similar to what Cecil mentioned around health. So that's why I got into pool around in college for that reason too. No worries. But that is why I do this work. And the feedback that I get from my employee resource groups is what keeps me going every day.
I'll keep mine short too. I mean, what keeps me going every day, first of all, I'm a Black woman who is bisexual and I'm plus size. And I'm tired of not seeing people who don't look like me in positions of power. And that's what keeps me going every day, is that motivation to excel and to really do that. And also, I mean, I have parents who grew up who are a part of the civil rights movement, and that were members of the NAACP. And, you know, my mother sat on the lunch counter and got scalded in the face with hot water because of her color. And so those are the battles that I fight. And I go back and I'm reminded of that we do this to fight the battles of the past and to make it better for the future. So those are the things that really do keep me motivated every day.
Beautiful. Thanks, folks. I'm remarkably inspired right now. Just so grateful. So let's close out. So a couple things here to be able to wrap up. This is a journey, right? This is a journey individually and collectively. And with that, for anybody who's also feeling inspired and want to be able to keep rocking and keep the conversation going. I mean, look, the webinar is not going to go on all night, so I apologize for that. But you can find us on LinkedIn, right? So reach out, send messages. I won't sign other folks up for things personally. I take pride in reaching out or responding to anybody who might contact me on LinkedIn, because I know what it's like to make those cold calls, who's just trying to find an ally and you never know who's going to pick up. I'm always here to pick up. With that, speaking of picking up, speaking of showing up, again, thank you, MVP, for hosting us tonight, for bringing this audience together. The work that MVP is doing is so critically important right now, because it is about it's about redistributing power. It is about putting the spotlight on more folks, passing the microphone so that we can hear more diverse and incredible stories, and in particular from emerging leaders who are ready to make change happen right now. So please find a way to be able to support MVP's work. Miguel posted a link in the chat to be able to donate, so you're able to build from there. Your company might have employer matching too, so please do talk to your folks at your company if that option might be available. And so with that, thank you everybody for participating. I believe a recording is going to be available too. You know, you'll stay tuned for all the follow-up stuff. Reach out on LinkedIn, and most importantly, take care of yourself. Stay safe, stay healthy, and much love to you all. Have a good night.